and welcome to another episode of FooBar. Today we are going to talk about Power Tools, that are a set of tools that will help us to make our application more well-architected. If you want to know more about serverless, cloud computing, or software engineer practices in general, subscribe in the red button below. I post videos on Tuesdays and on Thursdays, so let's get started. This is another episode in my series Get Certified with me. Today we have an amazing guest, Heitor Lessa. He works for AWS and he has been in the serverless community for a really long time. He's also one of the minds behind the Power Tools, that are a set of tools that will help us making our serverless applications more well-architected. We will learn more about the well-architected framework, what are the pillars, and why you would like to try these tools out. So let's get to the interview. Hello and welcome to another episode. Today we have an amazing guest, Heitor Lessa. Yes, you heard it right. It's not Heitor, it's Heitor. I just learned that. Principal Solution Architect for AWS. Welcome, Heitor.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, Marcia. Thanks for having
Bienvenido.
me.
Yes, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Well, I had this accident a little earlier. You probably saw.
Yeah,
on
on Twitter I saw it.
So for people who know me, this is actually me, just without the beard. It's an accident.
After COVID, you shut down.
Yeah. For those who don't know me, I'm a principal solutions architect at AWS. I've been working here for 7 years now.
Wow.
I had a bunch of roles from support to the sales organization to solutions architect, etc., etc. And then been doing serverless.
In AWS is impressive because you have gone through all the different steps until now you're like a principal solution architect. So it's very inspiring for a lot of people, like to see that growth that you can have inside an organization. So.
Yeah, this is something kind of I know it's going to be off topic a bit on
no
what
problem.
we want to
It's
discuss
a YouTube channel. We can do whatever we want.
Yeah, I think one of the pieces I love about AWS is I started in 2013 as a developer support engineer. I was mostly on infrastructure, doing Linux and networking. That's what I was hired for, as a specialist in networking and Linux. And it's amazing how AWS not only keeps on growing the number of services and everything, but also the number of opportunities. And then you realize, oh, there's this serverless thing now. Let's jump on that. And then all of a sudden you have like a whole ecosystem and jobs, and it's pretty inspiring. I think it is. That's from my side of actually experiencing that growth as well since the beginning.
And I think I always, when I met you the first time and you told me all your champs, it was super wow that you can do that type of things inside a company. I think it's one of my favorite things from AWS, because a lot of companies don't allow you to move so much. And one of the things that got me to know you is all your work that before joining AWS, all your work that you have done with serverless and working with the well-architected and the serverless lens. So maybe you can share a little bit about that. That I think is like the prelude for what we are going to talk today.
Sure. I think it's good to do a background on what well-architected is first, and then I will jump into the serverless lens.
Yeah.
So the well-architected basically is a framework to help customers to navigate throughout AWS ecosystem, and what are the best practices that they can use regardless of their size, what they're doing, what technology they're using on AWS. That goes from operational help, resiliency, cost, performance, and anything on operational side of things. And that's why we have these 5 pillars.
Yeah.
So the well-architected has grown a lot. Imagine trying to make sure the best practices are up to date. When I started, I had to memorize kind of 30 services. It was when Kinesis was announced. So well-architected, it was actually getting up to be public back in the days, and it was later in 2016. So when it was announced, we had all these best practices, but so the number of services grew too. one of the challenges we faced as the platform grew in terms of complexity and in terms of solving multiple problems of customers is how do I now apply this generic best practices to serverless, which back then was pretty new.
Yeah.
So then we had this idea of discussing what if we continue with the best practices generic one that works for all workloads, and we have more specific ones for things like serverless or perhaps things like financial services that have a lot of the exit plans and a bunch of other regulations. And so it is for machine learning as well. There's ethics, there's so many pieces to it. So we came up with this thing called Lens. So well-architected Lens is almost as if you are basically asking those questions, and now you add a lens for serverless, a lens for machine learning, and you get those additional insights and best practices for it.
Yeah.
So I started in 2017 on that.
Wow, very very early, because that's kind of serverless was in diapers.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the first year of serverless, from my experience working with it, you would definitely see more of those people who were at the cutting edge, like I want to try this new thing, I have ideas, let's try to make it work. And then back in 2016, it was when I started seeing some actually production adoption.
Well, we were starting to do production adoption in 2016, but still there was so little out there. There was no material. There was no best practices, like observability was like, and I'm so happy to see that was the focus of the serverless lens, like observability, because it's just so painful.
Yeah, and back then in 2016, I was doing a bunch of projects. I was working in fintech, in retail, and oil and gas, doing serverless back then. And like you said, I was going throughout the whole Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and the discussions were very similar. Oh, what about cold start? What about metrics? How do I do this? And what if I what limits can we have? When do I use containers versus serverless? And those questions like pop up as you normally would. And then I had this email internally that I sent around. Hey, I have this idea. What if we collect these best practices that I've been seeing from other customers along with some colleagues, and we formalize this into a document. And I think it was like 20 plus responses in a thread internally, and that's kind of the birth of the serverless lens. And as you know, at Amazon, once you have an idea, you suggest, and people actually say, "Let's do it." Exactly. And that was like, okay, let's block 6 months of my time. And we wrote, I think it was 60 pages when we first announced at reInvent 2017 by Werner.
Yeah, I read it. That's one of the things I keep on reading, and it's the source of many of my talks because it's just so well, like it has so many good pointers that it's like, I need to find a new talk for this, like what I can talk about. Let's see the serverless lens. What is there?
Yeah, and it was super good to see the reaction of some of those customers say, yes, I've been doing exactly this. Thanks for confirming it.
Exactly.
And then other things as well, like, oh, I didn't know Lambda could do this, or I didn't know Athena or something else could do that too. Yeah. So we progressively updated every year since 2017. And then this year, it was supposed to announce at reInvent last year, but we had some improvements to be made. Which was actually my talk last year, Arc for Architecture 307. I forgot.
I will leave it in the description box.
We'll put it in the link description. I prepared the whole talk to basically get everyone ready to see the announcement, but it didn't work out. But you see that most of the best practices made it to the console. And then early in February this year, we finally announced. The white paper is great. We got tons of feedback, thousands of downloads, but it wasn't something that customers could easily digest and record their decisions and improve on those decisions. So then when we announced Serverless Lens in the console, which was the first lens in there, that was huge. It took so much time to get it right and get editors. There's a whole village behind this. I'm just a talking head.
But it's so important because I think as I always say, serverless is such a change in paradigm, because if you're building containers or instances, it's more or less the same way that you have been making applications. You deploy them a little different on different kind of architectures, but at the end of the day, same paradigm. But when you move to serverless, it's all about event-driven architecture. It's all about distributed applications. And then if you're not really careful, it's like mind blows up. And I have to say, as a customer and as a person, I like that people tell me what is a good thing to do. So either they can validate what I'm doing, or I can learn something new and do it better. So I think it's really great that there is some opinions, because there is so many possibilities in AWS. Sure, you can do a lot of things right and a lot of things wrong, and it will scale.
Yeah, and it's great to see even from my own little perspective of trying to keep up to date those best practices. There's still a lot that have to be revalidated, and we have new announcements, everything. But it's great to see that customers are always willing to help and say, yeah, this is what I've done. This is what I learned. I wish I had learned this before. So we try to take this work backwards from customers and then apply this into the service lines. And I imagine,
well, you were building it, so I imagine most of the stories that are coming from customers, if they work well, they will end up as a best practice, because that's how you learn from other people telling you stories and about different, this one did it this way, maybe we should, and then if you see that, maybe everybody is having custom metrics, maybe that's a thing we should look at. They are having good experience with that. That's why best practices change, and the whole serverless is very new, so it will change every year.
There's something in the Serverless Lens which to me personally was the hardest to do, especially because you and I were not native English speakers, so it takes a while to get our heads around writing for native speakers and vice versa as well, or something everyone can understand, like accessible English. We have something called design principles, which basically are 7 that helps you decide, am I doing the right things?
Exactly.
Sometimes there's so many types of architectures that we probably don't even know exist. But the principles kind of help you guide that decision and think, well, maybe what I'm doing may not be ready for serverless yet, but it's something that maybe we should revisit the design principle, or maybe it can come later as the project matures as well.
Exactly. And the design principles, I think they are very generic for most of the use cases. So if you are starting a serverless project, the chances that you are starting in one of those that are listed in the Serverless Lens is very high, because it's like web backend, mobile app, data ingestion, like things that are very common for modern applications. So if you are just thinking about it, read this paper and go to the console and check the Serverless framework tool, because there is some great material there.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's great to hear.
It's one of my favorite papers. I think I read it like 20 million times.
Oh, wow. So you're definitely going to like what we're going to do this year. We have some updates planned for this year. So
for Rainband?
Yeah. One of the pieces that we've been hearing a lot is the surge of event bridge and how easy it allows customers to do multi-account eventing and all that.
Yeah.
So we're basically researching now one of the success stories from customers, and basically trying to get that and a few other little secrets that you see by the end of the year, hopefully.
Nice. EventBridge is one of my favorite services. And I used to work in enterprise when dinosaurs were roaming the streets. And I remember event buses not done in the cloud were a pain in the ass. Sorry for my French, but they were like always the bottleneck in all your applications, because, well, they were a centralized point, and I hate them. And then I met EventBridge and I was like, enterprise things. And then I used it and I was like, wow, this is the magic sauce to connect all your logical microservices together and make everything work so smooth and transparent. It's like, and it works so well, and it doesn't have the problems of having it in your basement, as we did have those machines in the prehistoric times when I was working in the enterprises.
Who hasn't? Who hasn't been there? But it's good though. I think always every workload has has its maturity, its operating model.
Yeah.
Some of them works for other solutions, but EventBridge is something that's
And
definitely.
technology is like fashion, it comes back. Things like maybe these event buses for enterprise, they were doing the thing well because you needed to connect all these different organizational parts. They have their problem, then they stopped being existing because the world was not ready for them. So we figured out other ways to connect our applications, and then the technology was ready again. And there was so many distributed applications out there that it was like, maybe we should go and use those fluffy jackets again and see what happens. And we have better textile and make it better and nicer and comfortable. So it just always come back. And if you look to those, many of the services are, if you have worked in enterprise, you're like, I have seen something like this. And it was horrible in the past, but now it works very well.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like microservices, like as an example, it wasn't anything new per se, but because the technology advanced so much, it made it possible to do it right.
Exactly.
And in event buses as well, they're actually a good thing.
Exactly. That's the nice thing, that when you know the basics of technology, you just keep on, at the end of the day, it just changed, but it makes sense and things change to that way. But let's go back to the serverless lens because I'm so good at diverting from everything. So the topic for today is the Power Tools, and that comes as an inspiration from your serverless lens and your work that you have done there. Maybe you can share a little bit on what is this and how you got to build it and create it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we announced Serverless Lens in the console earlier in February this year, we've heard from many customers that they love to see how prescriptive those best practices were and how they could do it. Specifically, what are the steps by step that they should go and tackle? How do I do monitoring? What are the common alerts? What are the common metrics to look at? Those things in all pillars security-wise. But there was still a good chunk of customers coming at us and asking, it would be great if you had a better way to adopt those best practices when we are developing, prototyping the application, as opposed to get halfway through down our sprint and look at how many good practices we missed.
Typical. It's just so typical.
So yeah, it's something that happens, and it's one of those things that as you mature your usage and your understanding of the AWS platform, you get to see you get to know where those practices are, and you get to prioritize them first. Other customers get to see them later. So Power Tools was the idea to bridge that gap in between. How can we help customers to adopt not all best practices from day one, because it takes time to build and make it simple to use, but how can you adopt at least some of the common best practices that we know based on data that customers overly miss? So we took the idea of, let's build a simple wrapper on top of some of the AWS SDKs that we have, like the X-Ray SDK for tracing, or a good logger with opinions already that we typically tell customers or advise customers to do, including the metrics. So the Power Tools is a suite of small utilities that make it easier for you to adopt those best practices. So we started with tracer, logger, and metrics. That grew like so quickly. We went to GA on the 18th of June, and just last week we had 30,000 downloads already.
Wow, that's
and it just
crazy.
Like went ballistic.
And
I was so happy.
You have it in Python, but you also launched the Java version as well?
Yeah, we launched Python first because obviously the best language in the world. We wanted to try that. Just kidding. And then 2 weeks ago, we launched a beta for Java, and we continue to hear from customers what other languages we should prioritize.
Node?
Yeah, so Node, we have this thing. The whole idea of Power Tools came from Dazan, who actually created the Power Tools for Node. So we thought we would actually hold it a bit because Dazan actually does a great job in many of those best practices already. Okay. So we're trying to give the same opportunity for Python devs, for Java devs, and hopefully .NET or Go as well.
So then I should look for those Dazan tools and put them in the description box so people can go and check them out.
Yeah, and a big clap and a big thank you for the Dazan as well. They've been instrumental not only on actually talking to us and telling us, hey, these are some of the issues we have. Would you like some help? And we've been in close contact with them, so they've been huge in making this happen too.
That's really great, because I think collaboration and customer collaboration is super important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I will definitely share the link and then we can put in the description below.
Yeah, you like that. YouTuber style. So that's amazing, 30,000 downloads. That's crazy for just a new project. But as I said at the beginning, monitoring and observability are one of the biggest pains in serverless applications. And I think at least if you're a developer that have been working in the cloud, maybe infrastructure as code doesn't seem that, because that's another really good practice for serverless, but that doesn't seem maybe that far away, because, well, you have been working with CloudFormation maybe, or your team, you have ops that tell you, you need to do this and that. But then when you get to deploy your applications without tracing enable and you have problems, you're like, now what?
Yeah, and that is the main reason why the first operational question in the Serverless Lens was exactly that. Do you know what metrics we provide out of the box? There's so many changes that come at the platform that sometimes you don't know. There's actually a quick link in CloudWatch that shows all the top metrics for all the services that you're using in a dashboard already,
Wow.
tailored to you. So those things are all in the Serverless Lens, and things like, are you doing structured logging? Are you doing centralized logging?
Exactly.
Are you doing
Structured.
custom metrics?
Yeah, I think we are going to talk a little bit about these three things a little bit more in detail, because we can just bubble things that, structured logging is great, but maybe we can talk a little bit what is structured logging and why it's so important.
Sure. Back in the days when you're doing logging, you have what we call the raw logging. So you import a logging library, could even be Bash if you want, if you like. And you basically say I'm log.info, and you get the message and the timestamp and the level of the logging. That's kind of the raw logging.
Console log, hello world, this word.
Yeah, exactly. These are all like already available, even in the browser, or console info, console debug, console table, you name it. But as you were trying to search those logs, you had to have a very powerful free text search to find something. The challenge of the free text search is, if you know what the message is, you can search for that message and that's it. But we know developers, as we can add more services, the message text would be completely different, so it'd be difficult to search. So people invented this, like, what if we log a dictionary so it's easier for us to search? Like add a message and a bunch of common keys, a contract for logging, like we do for services integration. But then they really quickly found, but actually the timestamp is in free text, and the level of the log is in free text, and that evolved to structured logging, where instead of actually now dumping just log.info and you have just a raw text, you now have everything as a dictionary or as a JSON serialized.
JSON, yeah.
So what that helps you is when you're using Kibana or CloudWatch logs, Logly, there's many tools, Datadog, I could go on. All those great tools, they have a parser for JSON logs. So if the logs is in JSON, or already structured logs, you can already search per field. So now you can say, give me all the logs from that date or starting on that date that had a fault or had error in it as a level, and possibly had a customer ID equals to whatever. So now your search is no longer by, show me all logs with text with this particular text. You now can be much smarter, and you can even create metrics from these logs as well. Exactly. So that's in a nutshell.
Yeah, but I think that's super important. And when you start using, like, maybe making your first Lambda application, this is so easy, who needs logs? And then your application starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it just becomes hell.
I like to say that serverless handles or solves almost largely many of the operational challenges you have in scaling applications.
Yeah.
But it's not a replacement for good practices for distributed systems. They still remain largely the same.
Exactly. So that's something I think people tend to forget because it's so easy to build your little Lambda function that scales, and most of the time it's in the happy path, but sometimes it's not.
That's why Adrian keeps talking about this chaos engineering thing, right?
I don't know what
So
is
it's
that. We only
yeah,
talked for 2 hours when he came to visit in the channel, so it's one of the longest
can't imagine.
interviews I have there.
I can't imagine.
And then we have the metrics that it's also under these power tools. What that represents? What kind of metrics?
Sure. When you're building applications in general, you're also looking for metrics to understand whether your application is healthy. Do you understand whether your application is having some performance issues or perfect, or perhaps it's basically anomaly? It's not behaving as it should. So these metrics, they can be things like operational metrics, like how many vacations have I had, how many cold starts have I had in my functions, or errors in my API, my upstream or downstream services. But you also have KPIs like business metrics, key performance indicators to say how many searches you had, how many customers actually purchased that thing, how many customers refunded. So those things are all metrics that you can create from your code using either synchronous approach by calling CloudWatch and say, hey, create this batch of metrics for me because this operation has just completed and I want to make sure that I have a metric so I can graph.
Exactly.
And then you have this smarter way of doing this asynchronously, which is how Power Tools can help you to do that much more easily, and it doesn't affect your performance.
Yeah.
Because now in Lambda, you pay for how long and how efficient your function runs to you.
Yeah, so if you send a message, then it's problem of the next one that catch it. You don't need to wait for it. But one thing I learned, at least when I was building my first serverless project, is how important business metrics are, because everything is so distributed, and at least performance and operational metrics, in the sense of you don't care that much because the infrastructure is so handled, at least that was my experience, that everything tends to be okay, but that doesn't mean that your application is performing and working well. So these business metrics, at least for us, were the light at the end of the tunnel to make sure that our application was working and doing what it needs to do. So we were building this project. We suffer a lot with observability because there was not really much there. We were building like Netflix for cartoons, and we have when we did that migration, we knew what the traffic was before and what we should expect and how many videos people should watch and for how long, and we had all these numbers. So then having this kind of anomaly detection and understanding what our KPIs was basic for us to sleep in the night, because Lambda was always up and running. It just didn't give us any information. So metrics are very, very important.
It is. And I think it's the key takeaway from that is, I think before the serverless or before cloud in general, one of the things that were very common for people to do was this passive monitoring, where you would basically install an agent like Nagios or Zabbix, you name it. I've been there. I was an ops guy. I love that. And you would install those agents and you get those beautiful metrics on CPU, memory, and the disk and all that. And you would look at that dashboard, so many graphs, and but do you really know what's going on in the application and your customer? So I think the observability kind of helps on that when you're basically asking arbitrary questions to your application to understand where your customers are. Yeah. So it's definitely something should be in everyone's sprint. Please define our metrics.
And think about at least the business metrics, like how they can help you to know if the end-to-end is working, because everything is distributed and asynchronous. So you might not be able to, just by monitoring a Lambda or a step function, know the whole picture. It might take some time to finalize the whole picture. But if you have the business metric, then it's a different story. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then the last bit that you mentioned that these power tools has is the tracing, and that's another very critical aspect. What is tracing?
So tracing is the ability for you to have a metadata, say a HTTP header, if you will, that is passed towards each of those services, systems, if you will, for every operation that you to basically run. So think of it as I'm trying to book a flight. So first I'm going to search for that flight, and then I pay for that flight, reserve that flight, and then I possibly receive some notification and possibly even calculate the loyalty points of this. So there are multiple steps in between. Sometimes they're not always linear. Sometimes they start synchronous and then branch off asynchronous. So tracing helps by having that metadata being passed almost like a token, if you will, along each of those nodes. So now you can start tracing and visualizing what that request looked like from A to B to C to D. So that's tracing in a nutshell.
Yeah, and that tracing, at least in my experience, it helps you to do live debugging when you have an error and you really don't know where to look for and those type of things. If you have some good tracing in place, then you can start trying to chase that error in this distributed hell that you might end up.
Yeah, I always try to go like top down. I will definitely look at metrics first. Metrics should tell me my dashboard should not be just a bunch of graphs because it's beautiful, Grafana, you name it. It doesn't matter the tool. You can always make the same mistake, but it should tell me the story. What is the layer? What is the business first, and then the system? What system I look at, and then operational, and then it goes, in layers. Excellent. And if I can find what's there, I can then jump to trace and find exactly what it is. Because your system is not going to be 2 Lambda functions, 5 Lambda functions. No. The reality is much bigger than that. We're talking like hundreds of functions. Obviously, it depends on the customer size, and depends on many variables. But I used to work with customers in the size of hundreds and a few thousands of Lambda functions. And it's not that, oh my God, this is impossible to debug. It actually grows organically. And it's so much easier when you have smaller teams to have all these tools at their disposal to figure out what's wrong.
Exactly. And I think that what you said about the different layers is super important. And there are different tools for solving where the problem is, because everything breaks all the time, so it's very important to be prepared for it and not panic. Just know your dashboards, and that's something people tend to forget. At least we did when we did our first serverless project, to add all these things until we were going to production, and we were just blindfolded trying to do things, and then we added as we were going, and we failed dramatically. But this is something that takes practice, and just that's why it's so important, these power tools, that you can add it while you're developing. So then when you're doing your development, you're failing because nobody makes the first thing work in the first go. In general, you have rounds of iterations. So then you can experiment with, look at this error, look at how the login look, this pop this thing and that. So you get more familiar, so when things break.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you want to show us the tool and show us some little demo?
Let's do it. Yeah, absolutely. So let me go here and share my screen. I was gonna do a full demo, but then I know that my computer is not actually taking its time with Docker today. I think it's some sentimental issue. So what I did here, if you were to try to reproduce the same demo, I'm basically using SAM init. And I'm basically selecting Python as a language, for instance, to work with, to show you. And if I were to do here, I would complete and start the demo. So I just run this, and I open Visual Studio Code to start showing you. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you what the project scaffolded to me. So this is what SAM init command will do for us. I basically did a SAM init hello world just to show you, if you have a basic raw Lambda function that all it does is just a hello world, what if you add power tools, and how much does that change to you? I have my dependencies in requirements.txt, but it could be Maven, it could be Gradle. We also have for both Python and Java for now. And I added Lambda Power Tools in here. Because SAM works locally, I have to build my function. Like I mentioned, if I were to build, it's going to take some minutes, and I don't want to waste that precious time. So I went ahead and run SAM build already to build my dependencies in it. So let's do this live, because I've already done it. So I have this folder here, SAM and build, which basically has the build that I run. If I were to go in it, I will have the function name that it's my hello world and all my dependencies in here that you can see Power Tools, X-Ray, Boto, etc., etc. So what I'm going to do is I will open the app.py in the build folder, and I will start showing how that looks like. When you start, you have this import JSON import request, which is commented out, and you have your function handler, which receives an event and a context. Very similar signature for all the languages. If I scroll that down, I have a return that says status code 200, and I'm basically saying hello world, nothing else.
Yeah, typical HTTP response.
Exactly. It has API gateway on top of that. So I'm just going to show you if I were to add Power Tools and how does that look like even when I run locally. So let's start there. So let me zoom in a bit. Hopefully the text size and the font size is good.
Yeah, everything looks good in this side.
Nice. So I will basically start importing the Lambda Power Tools, and I will import the core utilities that we mentioned, which is tracer, logger, and metrics. And now I'm just going to initialize these three. Oops, I don't need that. And I will basically, it's just initialize these guys here, lowercase, done. And then each of those will take a parameter called service. So I'm just going to say Marcia, the name of the service. Sorry, they just it's payment. Something more realistic.
Marcia is a very realistic service.
So now that I have the services here, I have this little utilities, the tracer and the logger and the metrics. So each of those will have decorators, which will basically add additional functionalities to our function. So what we do first is I could actually already start doing logger.info, logger.debug, etc. But this will not give me much. What I want to do, besides having structured logging, I want to add additional information to my logger to let them know that this comes from this Lambda function. So what do? I basically do logger, and I have this inject Lambda context, which we add documentation inside the code so you can see it, environment variables you can use, and things like that. So if we do this will extract the Lambda function context and add things like Lambda function request ID, memory, or whether this is a cold start or not, and the function arn, so you know the version that your function executed as well.
Nice.
And next, so now if I go inside this handler into logger.info, I will have a much bigger structure logging now, which I can show in a bit. And then I can do metrics. So actually tracer. I can trace this Lambda function by basically using capture handler. I don't have to pass any specific parameters.
You don't need to do in your infrastructure when you're defining with some, like in your sort of YAML, the tracer enable for API gateway or Lambda. Just by using this add tracer, it just will happen.
It has. I'll show in a minute as soon as we finish the code base. But let's assume that I already. This is the next step for us.
Good.
So if I do this tracer.capture handler, remember when I mentioned about every node of my system will basically pass that trace header token. So this will add additional metadata into what function inside your code has been executed, and will profile that.
Oh, that's really handy.
And the last bit is metrics for now. Because we're now adding metrics asynchronously, I have to log those metrics at the end of the execution. So I will keep those metrics in memory as much as possible. At the end of the execution, I will flush them to the logs. And CloudWatch, because it has a deep integration with Lambda, it will generate metrics for you, so you don't have to generate those metrics from within your function.
And this works even if the function fails.
If the function fails with an exception, for instance, we will capture the exception, log those metrics first, and then propagate the exception once again.
Okay, good.
So this will basically do some of the basics for you. But let's try to improve even further. What if I also want to capture cold start? I could basically use this parameter called capture code start equals to true. And now if this execution is a code start, just on my IDE complaining about this, it will automatically create a new CloudWatch metric for me if this is indeed a cold start.
Oh, nice.
If I'm also handling sensitive data, for instance, our tracer will automatically capture the response of your Lambda function and exception and add as a tracing metadata. If you want to disable that behavior, you can also pass a parameter called capture response. All of this is in the docs. I don't want to go to every single feature, but to show you how that looks.
But then maybe you can show us the docs.
Definitely show you.
Good.
So let's say that we got this, and I want to start showing you how logging will actually look like from this. So if I were to do something like log.info, like I'm about to return, just so you can see what structured logging looks like in practice.
And then logger.info, logger.error, the typical things that you will find in a logger.
Exactly. There's actually one extra nice bit of feature. Let's say you're basically doing some code. Let's say you do something like this. You're basically raising an issue, right? And then you are basically doing, like, you're capturing every exception if that happens. And if you do logger.exception and you say something failed right here, we will capture the exception for you. And obviously you raise it again, so if some function fails, we will capture the exception, serialize to JSON, and that exception will also be searched in your logs as well. So you can find things like, does it have an exception key? So all these like nice little features, we added that for you too. So let's just log for now and see how that looks like. If I were to go to my terminal, I would do some local invoke, the name of my function, and you should see a long string which will convert something failed. Because I haven't added any metrics, that's why it failed. So let's add a metric for now so you can see everything.
You cannot do it in pieces, you need to go all the way.
Yeah, exactly. The first thing we need for every metric, we can use environment variables, so we don't have to remember every parameter in the code, but let's just do it raw. So the name of our application, let's call this like a payment gateway. And this is the services payment. So it could be a service airline, and every function is responsible for a little service. So your namespace remains consistent. If you want to know all my metrics for my video stream or whatever, you go video stream and you go to every function or every service that belongs to that larger application. Inside, we will add a metric. So let's add a metrics.add metric, and we say, because my editors are so big of a text, it's hard for me to see. So for now, so let me just say I'm adding a metric of payment succeeded for some reason, and we say that the value is going to be 1. And in CloudWatch, you also have to pass the unit of that metric. Is that seconds? Is that count? What is it? It's very difficult, at least for me, to learn every possible metric by heart. So what I can do is I can get a bit of a help, go back here, and we can say import metric units from metrics.
Oh, nice.
And now I have an autocomplete for everything CloudWatch supports. So I can do all of this.
Nice.
Now, I hope this lab thing will work. So we added a metric, and we could also add a dimension, if you will, or anything like that. But let's stick with the basics. Let's try again, and let's try to invoke that Lambda function.
I have to say that count is my favorite one. I use it 90% of the cases.
You see that we got a bunch of things here, and I'll explain to you a bit of the schema validation. The reason that metrics failed was because we know the common mistakes people make when trying to log metrics to CloudWatch, so I tried to capture that and tell you exactly what's missing. That's what happened before when it failed. So let's copy this to this one line first, which is a structured logging bit, so you can see it. If I were to convert this to JSON, this is what you're going to see in your CloudWatch logs. You see how much extra information you have from the basic log that Lambda gives to you. Yeah. You see the message that I was about to tell you, the timestamp, the service that you define at the very top. An extra feature which I will talk to you in a bit, it talks whether that inject context, you will do all of this for us. You will know whether this is a cold start. If X-ray was enabled, in this case of some local, by default it is as a mock. But it gives you memory size, ARN, everything you need to start discovering what went wrong or what's going on in an application. So that's structure logging in a nutshell. And this is kind of the ice on the cake. As you run larger applications in production, imagine you have lots and lots of operations going on. When something goes wrong, the first reaction you think about is that, oh, I need debugging logs because I don't have enough information, right? Especially. So what you do is you can enable sampling rate. Instead of you having to change all your Lambda functions now to change the log level from info to debug, you can say 10% of my Lambda function invocations for this function specifically will set the log level as debug dynamically.
That's really cool.
Yes, so we can do that as well in production.
Because so I have tried some libraries that help you to do that, and it ends up very painful.
Yeah, so all of this is in the docs. You can, nice. If I were to stop here for now and show you how you would do that in your template. This is the normal SAM template, but again, the same Power Tools doesn't care if you're using SAM, Serverless Framework, Zappa, you name it. It tries to be for your code specifically. So if you use Chalice or anything like that, it doesn't matter. So inside your function, there's a bunch of environment variables that are not set that you could, so you stop from repeating yourself over and over and over. So if I were to do Power Tools environment variable, I add a bunch of those that I could use right now. The first one is metrics namespace. Your namespace will be the same, especially if you have multiple Lambda functions anyway, as long as they're part of the same system. Yeah. So I could just change this to payment gateway. This is specifically helpful, by default is disabled, when you're doing debugging locally. This will always log the incoming event that your Lambda function receives, so you can see what the event looks like. This is kind of for you.
Yeah. How many times we have done event log at the beginning of our function, just to know.
Exactly. That sampler rate that I showed you before is this. So I can now switch by default to 10% of my logs, should automatically change to debug, and then log as debug. Wow. And then the service name now I can say is payment. And obviously I also need to enable X-ray, which I will do something like this for my function. And I could also do for my API, as an example. If I go back, my code is now slightly cleaner, because now I don't need all the services bit here. And actually, not even this.
It's just take it automatically from the variables. You don't need to define anything.
Exactly. So now you have all of those. You just need to make sure you initialize this. So everything else should work as expected.
Yeah, and remove the cold start.
The cold start, it has to be as a parameter. I haven't made it as an environment variable. But one of the nicest bits that people who use Python before or X-ray SDK is that the tracer that we provide, it uses X-ray behind the scenes, and it will also automatically detect if we're running SAM CLI to invoke our function locally. What this means, it will detect it's running locally. X-ray doesn't run locally, so it will disable the tracing capabilities and allows your code to run. So when you go to prod, it will just work as fine.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it from the basics Power Tool. There's more. We can also do things like one of my favorites actually. You can use a decorator, decorator. So you can do something like, let's say something like this, and you create a new function like a new custom middleware cross-cutting concern. Let's say my middleware, and you receive. If I'm not mistaken, you receive, let me just check, the handler, the event, and the context. That's all you need. You can pass additional parameters, whatever you want. And you can do something like this. Run before my function handler runs, and run after my function handler runs. And now I can do something like this. And I can return my response. I can optionally even trace that whole middleware of mine. And now I can do this. My middleware, actually. And now you can create your own as well. You can combine those custom core trees that we gave to you, and you can do as you please. There's more in Power Tools, but let's just stop for now. I will show you the docs, and let's navigate to that. Does that make sense, Marcia?
This is really interesting.
Yeah, this should help expedite a lot on your development.
So before we go to the docs, what will be your recommendation for somebody that is starting a new serverless project and they get Power Tools? What is like the basic thing that they should set up in all the functions? Is these 3 things, as you put it in the hello world, that will be like every function should have that? Yeah,
absolutely. So these are the basics. I will show you this Serverless Lens in a minute that touches those 3 pieces. And these are this is definitely the basics. Make sure you have your structure login, your metrics, your tracer. One of the common questions from people who start is that which metrics do I do? Well, if you don't know what metrics you do, think about the business metrics first.
Yeah.
And then start going, because that could be easier for you, and then go lower to the operational bits. So start with these 3, and as you get more advanced, you can start using your custom middleware or fetching parameters from parameter store as secrets manager, and other nice utilities we offer to you. But these are the 3s that you should start with.
So basically every Lambda function should have these 3 things defined and being decorated with metrics, tracer, and logger. And then whenever you're logging, use the logger, no more, or whatever, console log or whatever Python use.
Yeah, it's just a logger.info.
Exactly.
Like the classic one.
Exactly.
So now that you know the environment variables, now that you know some of the basics, let me show you the repository so you can see that yourself as well. So in the repository, you can see the Lambda Power Tools Python. If you change to Java, you get access to the Java beta version that we just launched 2 weeks ago. And we would love to hear your feedback on what the experience should look like. As you probably could see in the Python version, we try to make the experience as easy as possible to abstract some of the complexities and make sure that you focus on the business logic only. In the repository, you will see the link to the documentation, which I will open in a bit. And you also see a detailed blog post by one of my colleagues who's helping me to maintain the Power Tools project, Tom, who wrote in the open source blog post a serverless shopping cart, which I will demo to you too. And we're on Slack, if you want to hang out with us, ask questions, or share what you're doing with Power Tools, we would love to have you there too.
Cool.
Right, let's look at the docs so you can see it. We spent a good amount of time trying to make the docs look good, easy to search, easy to navigate. So this is kind of the docs right now. We also pointed out the blog posts here, show how you can install it using Python dependency tools, but also using Lambda layers as well. We also offer that, and some of those utilities which I will let you explore on your own time, including all the environment variables you can use too, which I showed you only some of them. If I show the core utilities, you see the traces that I showed you before, including how that looks like in practice once you deploy and run. It has a more advanced use cases, how to trace asynchronous function generators in Python, escape hatch mechanisms, using tracing across multiple files, stuff like that, including the logger and traces and metrics and stuff like that. And these are the core utilities. This is what we want you to keep the experience as similar as possible across multiple languages. And in the utilities are general purpose utilities that typically make more sense for that language, for that ecosystem, for that communities. Things like fetching parameters from secrets manager, parameter store, DynamoDB, or even bring your own. And things like SQS batch processing. This was a contribution recently that we announced 4 days ago from Guilherme in Brazil. So I love that. It basically handles, if SQS sends you a batch of messages and your function fails for whatever reason, the SQS gets that message back into its queue and sends it to you once again. This utility takes into account partial failures. So if your function is processed like 1 or 2 messages, if there's an exception in between, you will delete those messages that you processed successfully, and you will only retry the message that failed because your function failed.
Sure, that's really cool.
Yeah. For now, if you want to have a look into something more complete and complex, look up for serverless shopping cart. If you were to install this application real quick, you get something that looks like this. And you should be able to add a little bit of items in your shopping cart. Behind the scenes, it's using Lambda Power Tools, so you can start seeing some of that, how some of that looks like. I could add a fake card number, my last name, and then let's say 2040. And behind the scenes, you use Python, a bit of Cognito, a bit of bunch of services, APIs as well. And if I were to go to, say, X-Ray, it will automatically show me the service map once it calculates all the functions that are using Power Tools. It's interconnection between services, latencies, and stuff like that.
Nice.
If I were to click in one of those, let's say add to cart function, and say I select use traces, I will start seeing not only the traces, but other bits that Power Tools add to you. You will things like here maybe, because it was a cold start. If it is a cold start, it will show you whether this function has a cold start as well. So let's take this one here. If you can still see my screen, I'm going to zoom in a bit.
Yeah, that's better.
That trace capture that you saw in the code, you will use this result. You see the lambda handler, the name of your handler, and every function that calls it, if it's also annotated, you will start showing to you here. Each of those is a subset of an operation, compute operation that your function is executing. So if I wanted to click on that one, I can start seeing metadata, what was the response look like, any additional annotation that you can add, or exceptions. You name it. Including we automatically
are those the kind of SAC segments in the X-ray?
Yes. Tracing methodologies or the X-ray specifically, you have the segment which the service creates, and it hands over to your function, which is a mutable option, and you can create sub-segments, so you can drill that down. This is one.
And the Power Tools will do those for you.
Exactly. Every time you do that thing, trace capture method or others we provide, we will automatically create you.
And we will take all the stupid questions I'm putting things together in my head while you explain. It's just like.
Yeah. And this will automatically be more opinionated, because not everyone knows what to name a segment. We do that for you. We take the function signature, we take the name, and we add it for you.
Yeah, because that's one of the challenges I always face when using the X-Ray SDK. What is a segment? Where I should place them? Should I do it like a function level? Should I do it inside the function? What is the name? What is inside? And I think it's great if everything already comes out.
Yeah, exactly. We add the response all these features. You can also suppress if you have sensitive data. But we handle the service name as well. So you can always remember what it was, the function method, the response. So we add the common practices that people use in production. So if you haven't done it, you now add the new team as a good default.
That's great.
If you were to go to CloudWatch, specifically in Serverless Lens, let's say you click in here, and let's say last 5 minutes, you will start seeing a more combined console experience with traces and logging in a single place. So I can start even filtering things like is this a cold start or not? Add the trace in Power Tools. If I were to click in one of those traces, let's say this, it doesn't matter which one. You see more specific ones. And we also have integration with Serverless Lens. So as soon as a log goes in, this was only let me pick another one.
I think that was an options from your course.
Okay. So let's try this host. Okay, so I have a few. Perfect.
Yeah,
so
that's a long one.
Which is very similar to that one, right? If I start showing now the logs. Oh, maybe just need to refresh a bit. I should be able to see the logs as well, which is a structured logging that you saw before. So let's try it like this. I can see view trace to few logs, but I should be able to see maybe because I have one node. Let's see. It doesn't matter. So I think it might take some time to show. Well, I can search.
Well, CloudWatch always takes a little bit.
Yeah, the nice bit about CloudWatch, because it's structured as well, I can look at views. And do you remember that? Service function name, code start. So now I have all this case automatically discovered, and I can now start doing things like filter code start, like something like that. Only show me what is the code start. They can start playing with that. But if I open up one, you see all of them here as exactly. And you can start seeing that wasn't a cold start, that was 0, so false, but it starts showing you more details.
And it's way easier to read than just reading a blob of text that you just throw in your...
Yeah, exactly. If you pay close attention, you might be asking yourself, what is this underscore AWS? This is the asynchronous CloudWatch metric that we created as well. So you start seeing that we had a metric called card updated. It was like unit code count, the namespace e-commerce app, and the values of that particular metric. So all of this is handled by the Power Tools as well. If I were to go to metrics,
you can
I
draw
should
them
have a namespace. Yes. Here we go. I have a namespace called e-commerce app, which all the metrics for my e-commerce, for all those functions should be in here. And the one that you just saw is right here because we only added that one.
Exactly.
So this is kind of a Power Tools in a nutshell, and how he addresses at least the first question of the Serverless Lens on some of those good practices. How do you trace? How do you log? How do you generate metrics for your application, operational metrics, things like that.
And I think it's super important because observability is one of those really, really hard things to do in serverless, because the paradigm is so different that it's great to have everything in one tool, because everything that you show, you can do it with multiple other tools, but you need to find the right tools, keep them updated, know that they have the good practices in place, and blah, 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 blah. And then it's just like, with what I don't do anything. So if you have one tool that is like AWS recommends, then let's use that one.
Yeah, we still love to hear your feedback on that too. Like, what are the languages that we should be prioritizing next? Any other utilities that you would like us to possibly work on, or if you have any bugs, or if you found anything. We always have
in the GitHub repo is the place.
Exactly. It's 100% open source. Everything is transparent. You should be able to see that there. If you're also interested in GitHub automation and what we've done to automate all of these bits, it's all under this folder, GitHub. I've learned a lot from the community, which I would like to give that back as well.
Cool. So then that's a call for action for everybody watching. If they want to give feedback and share their experience using these tools, then go to the GitHub repo. I'd also go there to download the project and get the documentation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, it's for customers. We look to hear what are practices that it took you some time to grasp, and that we could also make it easier for other customers. We're also looking forward to hear from you too, not only for customers who are starting, but customers who actually created a solid practice in production that we could lower the bar for entry for others.
Yeah, that's very important, because serverless is so new that there is not tons of books written about the best practices of serverless yet. So we need to learn from each other. And
yeah.
So Heitor, thank you very much. This was amazing, and I think I learned a lot. Now I want to look for those no tools and dig onto them, because I really a no developer. I'm not a Python developer. So.
And this is the good thing, right? We have to provide a seamless experience no matter what language you're coming from.
But
if we're supporting in Lambda, you should.
Yeah, and I think it's super important, because I have such a rough experience with observability at the beginning of my serverless path, and every time I talk with different customers, observability is one of the things that they struggle the most. And CloudWatch has so many functionalities, but everything is hard if you don't know what you're looking for. It's just like very complex. So I think having tools with opinions and that have the best practices built in, it's amazing.
Yeah, no, I love to hear that. So we like we mentioned, we were very deliberate on trying to not impact your code start and not getting in the way when you're developing it, but still allowing you to very easily pick this tracing, pick these good practices, and now you're in a much better place from day one.
Exactly, and we all add monitoring and log into our application, so it's just using a different library than the one that you were using from your language, so it doesn't impact you at all. It's just, okay, instead of doing whatever you're doing in Python, then just use the logger.info and then you're ready. And even you can use logger.debug and use this amazing feature of just having some of your calls be logged and not. And I think that's something I tried with a library and something I tried a long time ago, and it was not that simple and it didn't work that well. And I'm super happy to see this so simply done with an environmental variable. I want 10% of my calls logged, and I was like, okay, I will do that for you.
Awesome. That's what we want to hear from customers. We want them to be, oh, I didn't know it could be that easy. We definitely want, that's the bar we're striving. There's obviously, it's hard to get to simple, as many customers would think.
Wow.
But we're actually willing to do that.
Exactly, and well, you can get simple, but still this is a hard thing to make production-ready applications at scale, and there is a lot that can be simplified, but still nothing is like that you think very hard and it just happens. You still need to type it and know that it exists. So that's what I'm excited to make, this type of videos that people like get to learn these tools and they get excited about it. So how people can reach to you with the GitHub repo, that's the best place to talk to the team.
For the Power Tools, they can raise an issue, as always.
Okay.
If they're interested, we also have a Slack channel on the AWS developers.
That's good.
It's always on the repo as well. And if you want some, if there's a specific thing I can possibly help, you can also reach out to me on Twitter.
Good.
We will leave the contact details for you.
Everything will be in the description box. So thank you very much, Heitor. I learned today, and I will not make my mistake again.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us. I feel honored to be in your channel, which I've been watching ever since, even before you joined us. So good to be here.
It's always great to have you here, and I see you maybe in another episode talking about something else, because you have a lot to say.
It could be. Perfect. Well, thanks again, Marcia, and I appreciate that. And thanks everyone for watching.
Yeah. This was the video for today. I hope you like it. If you did, give a big thumbs up and let me know in the comment box below who you like me to interview next. I have a couple slots left in my fall planning, so it will be great to get some names that you are interested in. All the links that we talked with Heitor are in the description box below, so go and check them out, and I see you in the next episode of FooBar. Ciao, ciao!